Break the news, Dave Aranda going to Baylor. Seems like it came together pretty quickly there, Bruce.
It did. Look, I think in the case of Dave, he's obviously wanted to be a head coach for a long time, and this is a pretty good situation. Matt Rule did a remarkable job really transforming Baylor, which had been in such a dark place, and not only built the program up, he built it back the right way, and he leaves behind a really good locker room and a good culture of the players he recruited. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how Dave does. Obviously, everybody knows how bright he is and how cerebral and his personality. And so to jump into that, it's not like, look, they were playing for conference the championship this past year. Obviously, some of those players have moved on, but this is a pretty ripe opportunity as a chance to win at a Power 5 conference. So, good for him to get it. I think there were some other guys that they were looking at, but, right now, as everybody knows, LSU is the hottest thing in football, and Dave Aranda was a big reason why.
You mentioned there was other names attached to the job, but now that you have your man in Dave Aranda at Baylor, how is that being welcomed in Waco?
I think they know his track record. I mean, he's obviously one of the smartest football coaches anywhere, much less, on the defensive side of the ball. I think that, there was going to be there's big shoes to fill right now with Matt Rule because of not just what he did on the field, but also, how he kind of changed a little bit of the narrative about Baylor. And obviously it's a really ugly recent history that program had. I think for people who know Dave Aranda, they know his character and they know he's a decent man. I think, there's going to be some challenges with that job, but I just think whatever job he was going to get, I think he's a unique, personality. And I think that it's going to be really interesting to see what he'll do as a head coach.
Talking with Bruce Feldman of Fox Sports. Bruce, it came, obviously Dave got the job, but how close was it? Who was he kind of battling to get this job? And from a LSU perspective, I'm curious to see how he does. We know he's a genius when it comes to the X's and O's of the game. It's just the other parts, the recruiting, the being in the limelight, having that big personality and work in the booster room. That's the stuff that I guess the question marks where they lie.
Yeah, and it's a different deal, right? Because it's one thing to have your guys in the defensive staff room and you're not doing as much of the stuff that you're mentioning, which is all the other stuff. I mean, not to say that, when Texas A&M had Johnny Football and they were, going great, and Cliff Kingsbury, Johnny wins the Heisman, Cliff gets the job at his alma mater. I mean, he was a brilliant scheme guy and kind of helped showcase Johnny. But then all the other stuff, when you're a first-time head coach, it's going to be critical about what kind of staff Dave can put together to surround himself with and what kind of offense does he want to run. A lot of times defensive guys will try to hire somebody who does the stuff that they kind of hate dealing with the most scheme-wise. So those things. But, one of the things I talked to somebody yesterday, a coach who was really close to Dave at a previous stop, and this coach said, you know what, Dave has a very unique relationship with his players because they know that he gives them a tactical advantage and puts them in the best position to succeed. And this coach said the biggest thing he thinks that works for Dave is he doesn't try to be somebody he's not. And if he did, I think it would, people would see through it right away. And so because he's authentic and has always been that way, he's not the rah-rah guy. Now, he has a really good sense of humor. I mean, I've seen even some of this where he has kind of a silly sense of humor, something that probably maybe people wouldn't necessarily think. This goes with the kind of cerebral, professorial kind of persona he has. But if he goes out and tries to, Ed Ogeron, I think, was going to be able to be his Coach O, and that's who he is. I mean, that's not Dave Aranda. Just like Dave Aranda's not Les Miles, Dave Aranda's not going to be somebody else, But he's worked for some really unique characters, and his relationships with very different guys. I mean, look, in the Big 12, he worked for Les Miles at Kansas. He went to college with Tom Herman. Tom Herman's the head coach at Texas, and certainly another guy he worked with at Utah State, Matt Wells, and now at Texas Tech. I mean, I think he has a lot of different pictures to see of what works and what works for guys. And actually, I think the biggest thing is surrounding himself with people who will be really good in helping him grow what he wants that program to be about going forward from what it is right now in Waco.
Bruce Feldman is our guest here on Hanging with Hester, of course, of Fox Sports and The Athletic as well. Okay, last question about Dave Aranda before we move on, and it's more about who replaces Dave Aranda. You know Coach O as well as anybody. Do you think Coach O goes for a proven name? Do you think he goes the Joe Brady route, gets a younger guy that maybe we don't know as a household name, but he's been impressed with him? Which way can you see that going?
I think he probably goes for the proven name here. I mean, look, the one thing is as terrific as Dave is, LSU is always going to have, I think, elite defenses because look at what you got on the back end. I mean, yeah, we saw a bunch of kids leaving early, but you're still going to have a loaded secondary with Stingley and Jacoby Stevens, and you got Elias Ricks coming in. You got a bunch of long, young cornerbacks, and Perry Vincent's still there. You still got, I mean, Tyler Sheldon's in the middle of that defensive line. He's a huge problem. Glenn Logan, I think has a chance, if he keeps working, has a chance to be one of the best D linemen in the country. So, I mean, yeah, they got to replace the linebackers, but I think he's going to look and say, okay, here's what I want. I know that I could trust Dave with the defense. Well, I'm curious to see what happens with Bill Bush. He's a guy that Dave brought in. I know Orgeron really respects him. He's the safeties coach. He's been a defensive coordinator before. I would think Bill Bush is going to have some opportunities, certainly whether they're in Waco or staying in Baton Rouge. So, look, the thing to keep in mind is for a lot of people who I think are looking as a doom and gloom, saying, wow, this guy's leaving and that guy's leaving, all these underclassmen are leaving, and obviously Joe Burrow is moving on, is LSU was paying Dave Aranda a lot of money. And so now they're going to have a lot of money to pay some other defensive coordinator. And I think there's going to be a lot of guys who are probably sitting at big jobs right now, probably saying, hey, I wouldn't mind having Derek Stingley to be my shutdown corner, and I could do a lot with that.
Bruce, you wrote an amazing article there, how LSU got ready to be the national champs over at The Athletic. We've actually shared that at Hanging On 104.5 on our Twitter page. And you got me already, like in the first paragraph, when you talk about ESPN asked each coach a question for the other coach, and Dabo Swinney joked and said, would you sit Joe Burrow for the first quarter? And Coach O's response was going to be, I almost said I'm planning on letting him sit out the fourth quarter. That is the kind of energy, that's the kind of confidence that this LSU team had the entire season. Did you feel that as you're getting ready for this article?
I did. That's the thing that kind of wowed me more than anything was just there was nobody in there, I felt like, who was like, oh yeah, not only we're going to have to, it'd be a close game. There was a lot of people in there I think felt like, you know what, we just blew Oklahoma out of the building. We whooped Georgia. This is what's going to happen to Clemson. And I just think they knew they were on such a roll. And I think one of the things that people on the outside are looking at and go, well, they're going to lose Joe Burrow and it's not going to be the same, and they're going to lose Joe Brady and it's not going to be the same. And you can point to Jamar Chase's year, or Clyde's year, or, you can name it. But I think it was just kind of the perfect storm. They knew they were on this roll. It was like the shooter who's has hit in the 3-point contest, is hit 20 in a row, and he gets to the final rack, and you're like, all right, he's going to nail the rest of these balls too. I mean, that's kind of what it felt like, and it felt like they just pushed all the right buttons. There was nothing from being around them. It was like, hey, we've seen this. Now what are you going to do next? There was a moment that I didn't end up using in the story, but it's basically where late in the week, it's right before, it's basically game day where they do their deal with the special teams and, who's in, who's out. And who's getting called on. And there's a couple of guys who are backups on the special teams, the backup kicker. There's a backup receiver. I think his name is Evan Francione. And when they get called out, it's like, okay, what are these guys going to act out and do? because it just gets everybody fired up. And it's like, I've been there now. This is the third game. I'm like, okay, what do these guys got up their sleeve for the last round of this? And so the one kid gets up and basically, I think he smashed two energy drinks on his face, did kind of the Stone Cold Steve Austin deal. The other kid did his kind of Braveheart thing, and the room went wild, and that's, I think it had just been this role that they were on, and it was really cool to see. I mean, I got to admit, it was like one of the more fun stories to be a part of, because I knew a lot of what was going to happen. And you were, just like I kind of sitting in the press box when they're down by 10 points. I'm like, all right. I'm like almost like looking at my watch, like I've seen this movie before. I know how it ends. And that's kind of what this role was on. And that's really what I tried to reflect in the story today on The Athletic was just the energy of what that was.
Talking with Bruce Feldman of Fox Sports. Bruce, you know Coach O very well, and wrote and covered him in Oxford. And there's been a lot made about the transition. In your opinion, what is the biggest difference? How has he changed from a dozen years ago when things didn't go so well at Ole Miss?
I think it's a couple of things. One, I think he knows himself so well, and I think he knows, we all have some instincts that aren't always probably the wisest for us to act on. And I think he's got control of those in terms of, like, I think some of that gets caught into trust, and I think he trusts his staff, he trusts his players at a level that, he didn't have a staff like this. He certainly didn't have players this way. So I think it's like it kind of fed off itself. And so much of that is why he can let everybody, it was such a loose team and it was such a confident team, because I think it all built off of that, and I mean, we had talked about this after the game. We're a few of the last people there in the locker room, and it's his wife and myself, and I don't know if Jeff, the DFO, had come in yet, and he had just talked about basically coaching his team and his players the relationship he had when he recruited them. That was the guy, treat them like my sons. I genuinely believe that's in his heart when he's doing this. And so, for the guys who are around him at Ole Miss, I mean, this is almost like I don't say the opposite, because there were guys who I think he felt that way about, but and maybe it was reflected, maybe it wasn't, but I just think you just saw a guy who was way more comfortable and confident and trusting in that. I mean, I think it was always there. I mean, I think he was always really smart about reading people and had that in him, and you'd see that. But I just think that, this was like the perfect fit for him, and this has been the perfect fit for him in Baton Rouge. And I just think he's the one constant there, and I think he's put people in position to be at their best, whether it's Joe Burrow or Joe Brady or Clyde Edwards-Helaire or you name it. I mean, this has been it's just kind of something bigger than anything else I think they've been a part of.
All right, he is Bruce Feldman, Fox Sports and The Athletic. You need to go check out this article. Again, we shared it on our page. Go check it out, how LSU got ready to be national champions. A lot of great stuff in there. And if you're not already part of The Athletic, you need to do it because it is well worth it. Bruce, always appreciate the time, my man.
My pleasure. Great seeing you guys.